Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at the technique and everything behind creating a fluffy texture of fur. I know this one is something that you guys struggle with, as you guys have asked me before, so here it is for you. So the reference and everything that I used for this one was actually one that I'd taken myself of my mother's cat, and he's very fluffy. He's got this really dense grey fur, so I thought this would be perfect for this. If you want to follow along in real time and have the reference photo and everything to hand, then make sure you go and check out my Patreon on my website because this is listed over there. So the first thing that I've actually done here is just mapped out with a graphite pencil, just an HB mechanical pencil, the direction and any directional changes of the fur. This is actually a really important step because then you can add in your base layers dependent on how you've added in your graphite lines. So this just gives you an indication as to where things are overlapping and where you maybe need to add in some shading and that kind of stuff. So after that, then I go straight in with the base colours, and as I said, this is a nice grey fluffy fur, so I've gone in with a warm grey one as the base, and instead of working over the whole entire thing, I'm just working in small sections. So I'm looking at the graphite that I've put down, and I'm working in individual clumps and in areas where the fur direction is all going in one way. So just working in small sections, as you can see I'm just filling in this middle section to begin with. I just put in that base of warm grey one, all going in the same direction. Then I've just gone in with my next darkest colour, which was a warm grey too, so not very dark at all, and I've just filled in the areas where I have some shadows and where I've got some darker tones. So just going in with that layer and just adding in those areas so I can see them a lot better when I go in with some darker colours, as I'm doing now. So when it comes to the actual fur texture, you can see I'm just kind of explaining or trying to explain the kind of fur technique that you need to employ for doing this. So just working in those darker sections where I added in that warm grey too, I'm just going in with some luminance colours and I'm just adding in some really soft fur lines. I'm going in and pointing the pencil down to begin with and then flicking towards the end and lifting the pencil off so get a nice tapered line. If you're wondering how exactly you can go about creating this type of line, I do have a whole separate video of this. I'll leave the link in the description below so you can go and check that out as well. But we're just basically crossing over the hairs a lot more than we would if we was drawing like a straighter type of hair, like just ordinary long hair. So fluffy fur, you want to kind of overlap the fur lines, and that just creates the appearance of depth. So by overlapping the lines over the top of one another, crisscrossing them and all that kind of stuff, you're just giving the illusion that there is a lot of dense fluff and fur underneath there. So that's all we're doing with the fur lines. And then I'm just going to work into the next clump. I'm doing exactly the same process, putting down the base layer of the warm grey one, warm grey 2 for some of the darker areas, and then going in with the darker colours and adding in those really fine fur lines. So with these fur lines you do kind of need a really light touch, and you want to build them up with your light hand rather than going in with a heavy hand to begin with. And just building up with that light hand is just going to add to that illusion of depth, add to that illusion that this is like really thick, fluffy, dense fur. And again, with that crisscross, that overlap of the fur lines as well, you're going to add more to that illusion of that really thick, fluffy fur. So as you can see, I'm just repeating the process again for all of these individual sections. So all of these sections are just the fur where it's going in slightly different directions. So you've got that main one through the middle, which is going from the right to the left. There's a slight curve in it. Then I did that other little section which was going a bit more up to the top left hand corner, and then these other ones here again kind of going up a little bit more up towards the top left hand corner as well. So where you do have some darker areas of fluffy fur and the fur looks a lot more dense and it's not kind of like airy fairy, you want to just use a little bit of a different technique with your pencil. So using more of a shading method and keeping the strokes really close together and keeping them quite short as well, especially where you've got some darker areas. So as you can see on this area, I kind of did the little section towards the bottom of this clump off to the right first, and I used that really short, really kind of blunt shading technique right into where you've got some overlaps of the other clumps of fur. That just helps with the shadowing, and it also just helps to distinguish that this maybe is a lot more of a dense, more tightly packed area of fluffy fur. And that's all that I use that technique there for. So again, we're going in with the same technique of putting down the warm grey 1, going in with some warm grey 2, and then going in with some of the darker colours. So again, you can see me using that really kind of tightly compacted shading technique here in those darker areas. I'm just going in with, I think it was a warm grey 4 for this, and then going in with some of the darker coloured pencils, so some dark sepia, and adding in some dark fur lines over the top, just to give the illusion that you've got this dense packed fur underneath a few of these darker kind of more aerated areas of fur over the top. So that's what the darker pencil is adding there. So it's just adding in a little bit of extra fur over the top, just giving that extra layer of depth. So you can actually complete fluffy fur like this by going in and adding in a base all over and working the individual directions of fur with your base, and then adding in the next colour, which will be a warm grey 2 if you're doing grey fur. But I like to work clump by clump like this, just so I can keep track of exactly where I've been and exactly which section I'm working on. I find that when I fill in too much of an area, especially when it's got tricky fur directions that you kind of need to keep an eye on, I kind of get a little bit lost, and then I can kind of lose myself, and then I lose motivation, and yeah, then I end up not finishing something. So I like to work like this just purely because it keeps my concentration a lot more. You do have to blend the clumps together as well, which is one thing that I will add. So as you can see I'm doing here, I'm kind of using some of the darker pencils like the mid-tone, so some warm grey 4 and some dark sepia, and I'm just working into the areas between the clumps where I've added them together. So you kind of want to make sure that you don't end up with like little white gaps around all of the little clumps if you're working in that way, because otherwise it's going to look a bit like a patchwork quilt. So you just need to make sure that you go in with some mid-tones and add some fur lines so that they overlap those different sections as well, because even though they are kind of going in different directions and they are kind of like separate little clumps of fur, you will get some fur lines which are actually going over the top and overlapping. So I just go in with a darker pencil, some mid-tones, and add some of those fur lines so that you get rid of that tiny little white gap around each of the clumps, and then you also just add in these fur lines over the top, and again adds that layer of depth, adds that really kind of fluffy texture by just going in and overlapping some darker coloured hairs over some of the clumps. So I'm just working on the last clump here and using a mixture of that really tightly packed shading technique to get some of the darker areas where you've got some really dense fur, and then using that darker pencil to add in some of the flyaway hairs over the top, and just adding in a little bit of texture there. And you'll see in a second as well that I go in and go around the edges and add in some darker coloured fur, and then to finish it off as well I go in with a white pencil and add in any of the lighter fur lines that are kind of coming over the top. So there's not just dark fur lines that you'll see coming over the top, there will also be some lighter fur lines. So I like to go in with a Holbein soft white pencil and just add in some of those white flyaway hairs over the top as well. You can also use a craft blade, so I've got a slice ceramic blade, or you can use something like an X-Acto knife, and you can etch away the hairs to make it look as if there's some flyaway hairs over the top. With that technique though, you want to be careful that you don't make it look too wiry or anything like that. But that's pretty much it. Those are my short techniques on how to create some fluffy looking fur. I really hope that this has helped you if you are trying to create this texture. It can be a little bit of a tricky one, but as soon as you get the hang of it, then it should be all good. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Make sure you leave a like on this video, and I'll catch you guys next week. Bye!